So, a very good evening and welcome along to this week's Irish Whisky Review, UlsterWhisky.com's show. It's all about woman in whisky this week. And if you want to find out more about the female form's contribution to the world of whisky, you're going to find it all tonight from the man, the myth, the legend himself, Marty McAuley. We're going to be speaking to him very, very, very shortly. He's standing by for us at his sort of evil villain, Bond villain's den. So here he is. Good evening, Marty. Good evening to you.
Good evening. I feel like I should be stroking a cat. You know.
Boy, you got to laugh. You got to laugh. So how have you been? The weather's changed for the worse, so it's pretty rough where we are in the sort of County Antrim part of Northern Ireland. It's very, very, very rainy and wet now.
Yeah, it's been sort of close all day, sort of clammy and claggy, and yeah, we're getting pings there, Justin. Do you hear it?
Yeah, that's the pings. That's the people logging on. We had 3.5 thousand views over the last week. The vast majority of them coming on in the first 24 hours or so as people are awake and asleep around the world when this goes out. It's quite difficult for them to watch live because obviously it's, in Europe, it's 2,300 hours. And, over in sort of North America, they're 5 hours behind us at least, so it's quite hard for them to watch it. Some places in the world, especially down under in Australia, because they're sound asleep in their bed at the minute. I would say so.
Do you think they would help
well, no. Well, you can watch it at any time you like. So I mean, let's face it. Gone are the days where you have to stay up in the middle of the night and watch the thing, because you used to just video record it if it was on in the middle of the night. That's all you did. So. We're talking about women in whiskey this week. What's the score with that?
Right. I have been asked a couple of times by a few ladies, and one in particular. I want to talk about one in particular. This is a woman who drinks whiskey. She knows her whiskey. She knows what she like. She's a peat monster. She's not, it's not a cocktail thing. She drinks neat Laphroaig and Ardbegs and all this kind of stuff. And she was talking to her brother-in-law's friend, okay? And what he said to her was, what would a woman know about whiskey, right? That sort of typical, sort of chauvinistic, ridiculous attitude, okay? And I thought to myself, well, women know quite a lot about whiskey. Currently, it's estimated that about 34% of the buying customers of whiskey are now women. So about a third of the people who are drinking whiskey are women. Okay, now they have a huge history in the whole story, a very illustrious history in the whole story. In many ways, you could say it was them that founded the whole thing.
Okay, yeah.
As it comes up, there's a bit of a lull of a period where there's not really a huge amount of activity for women in the whole industry. But these days, that's all changed again. It's coming back. Now, I've mentioned this woman before. If I take you right the way back to in and around the 1st century BC, a woman called Marie Cabrera, Marie the Jewess as she was known, she was reckoned to be a librarian at the Library of Alexandria. Now, we have none of her records. We don't have any of her records. We just have people from after her who quote her. And in it, they talk about basically a little still that she made to distill ale or beer at the time. And that's probably the first official recorded reference to this process, distilling.
We don't have a slide for that or a picture from that, Marty, because it's 2,000 years ago plus, isn't it?
No, put it like this: you could probably find one on Facebook. There'll be somebody out there have one,
a fake one.
Yes, but so she's really the first person documented as having that process, and it's referred to a few hundred years after she died. Now, at the time, most of this would have been used in cosmetics and perfumes and stuff. and it was known as alcohol, and that's where we get the word alcohol from. Okay, now so that's really the very origins and basically the first references to distilled spirits way back in Egypt at the time. Now, if you skip along over the history, you come to the making of beer and that kind of alcohol. This was a domestic chore. Now, while the men were out in the fields or away fighting battles, the women ran the houses, and this would have been a form of cooking. Now, probably distilling came to the British Isles via monks. That's where they reckon it's come from. It came from the continent and came across to the British Isles. Now, women would have made alcohol at home as a medicinal thing, as something medicinal, because obviously
A bit like this old doll. Would she have done that sort of thing?
she done it on a bigger scale a bit later on. Yeah, she well, she done it on a much bigger scale. But what they would have done was they would have made whiskey for all manner of ailments. I mean, you have to remember there was no medicines back then, so they weren't. This was basically the only cure they had. So they would have made it up in the house or on the farm as a domestic chore, if you like. Then some of them became apothecaries, basically your pharmacists of the day. And all was going along swimmingly until James I appeared, James VI of Scotland. And then he decided that this was tantamount to witchcraft. So when you hear about witches being burnt at the stake, a lot of them it was because they were making whiskey. They were making alcoholic spirit. Now, this whiskey wouldn't have been what we would sort of term whiskey today. It was probably a bit more like gin than it would be whiskey. But there was 4,000 witches executed in the British Isles because of this witchcraft. And it's in part to do with the fact that they were making the spirit. They were the ones who were doing the distilling. So it was basically totally prohibited for women to do. Obviously, if there was a chance of you getting burnt at the stake, it's a pretty good deterrent, So that was really sort of during the Middle Ages. That aspect then they sort of disappeared. But if you bring it a little bit closer to today, by that I'm talking about the 18th century, you start to see women coming in and being distillers. Now, we don't have records of companies the same way as we obviously do now, but you can find out that some women were fined for not paying taxes and stuff. There's a girl called Margot Elliott, for example. She was fined £5 in 1768 for not paying her taxes, for having a still. So we know that she was distilling, and it was probably a fairly common thing for women to do, and sell it. So it was a way of a woman basically making some money as well. They would have sold it maybe to the inn and to the taverns and that kind of thing. So that's essentially where they fit in at that period of time. Now, the late 1700s would have been really where you start to see bigger distilleries. I talked about this last week or a few weeks ago. You have much more commercialized distilleries starting to appear. It's around that time that Bushmills, the company of Bushmills, is actually registered at that time. So again, you have these women owning and doing the distilling. Now, the picture you have up now, that's obviously of a much later period, but it shows. We think these days of women coming into an industrial setting, if you like, after the First World War. First World War, shortage of men working in factories and stuff. Women then are taken on to do the jobs that were traditionally done by men in factories. But women have always worked in distilleries. They've always been there or thereabouts. Normally, at that point, as you can see in the bottling plants and that kind of thing. So they've been in and around that when they had employment in a factory. Now, this is it's kind of important because you have that women in the workplace, and they were used to being in that workplace. It wasn't unusual for them to be there, you know. Now, as I say, there was women who were there or thereabouts all the time. I mean, you had Kate Kearney in the 1850s, who was known as the Poteen Queen. So I know it's not whiskey; it's in the same ballpark. And she was known as the Poteen Queen. She was making stuff. She was selling it. We had Mary McBride up in Cushendun, who was, again, she was a distiller. It was illegal to sell whiskey, so what she did was she sold water and gave you a free glass of whiskey with it. As you want, you know. So they've always had this tradition. Okay. Now, as I say, the Bushmills was registered in the 1780s, and what a lot of people don't know is that at one point it was actually owned by a woman. It was run by a woman called Ellen Jane Corrigan, and she played a huge part. Now, this is a little bit later on. I'm maybe jumping a little bit ahead of myself. But she was the woman who brought electricity into Bushmills. She was the woman who took Bushmills across where you see a bottle of Black Bush, you see it always says about these medals, which they won some of the world's fairs. She was the one who won these medals. You know, she upped production at Bushmills from 80,000 gallons a year to 100,000 gallons a year. So you had, again, this is all important. I'll get back to women who owned distilleries, because during the 19th century, and I'm talking primarily about in the US at this point, you had sort of the Wild West and the sort of frontier, if you like, sort of the New World. And you had all these new saloons and bars and, well, to be honest, brothels as well. One of the ways that women made some money was that they got commission for the more booze they sold. So the selling of whiskey, it was reckoned that in the States, there was many, many more shots of whiskey sold by women than actually by men. So again, it's all part of the trade, all part of the whole thing. Now, globally, in the sort of late 19th century, early 20th, you had a movement about temperance. They were wives, I'm talking about here, were really fed up of their husbands going away to the saloon, getting drunk and going to brothels and all that kind of thing. You can understand why. So there was a big push. There was a big push for temperance, outlawing of alcohol, getting rid of alcohol, getting rid of the booze. So women then came on board with primarily the Catholic Church to say they wanted alcohol banned. Okay, and that would then keep the men at home, if you like, and whiskey booze. Now, there was lots of graphics of like women smashing up, and women did this. They used to go around and smash up whiskey kegs. They would went into bars. They were basically like the suffragettes, and the two weren't mutually exclusive a lot of the time. You know, the same women who were arguing for the right to vote were the same women who were going around smashing up casks of whiskey. So obviously, as I'm sure you're well aware, Justin, they got limited success over here, but they got plenty of success over in the States, where they got prohibition brought in, the Volstead Act, which brought in the banning of alcohol and the sale of alcohol. So I'm going to take a little drink because the very thought of that's making me wake at the knees.
Well, we can see the sort of prohibition crusaders there on their horseback with their axes, lithograph cutting it down. I mean, but it was a very lucrative trade for a lot of people at that time, wasn't it? Prohibition.
Well, once prohibition was brought in, what happened was it didn't stop anybody from drinking. The problem was people were still carrying on drinking, probably drinking even more, but there was no regulation to it. They were smuggling it in. Now, everyone, when they think of prohibition, they think of Al Capone, and they think of these guys who are, making a vast amount of money, the mafia and all this kind of stuff. It's been estimated that 5 times more whiskey was sold by women than by men. And a couple of very good reasons for that. It was against the law in a lot of states in America to actually search a woman. The policeman couldn't search her because it was illegal. So obviously,
because all the policemen were policemen, there was no policewoman then.
No, exactly. So it would have been considered very, very bad form for a man to put his hand on a married woman, or even an unmarried woman. So they smuggled it in, and they used to smuggle it in baby carriages. They smuggled it in on their person, the way you see in the picture there. And even if they were caught, a lot of them were very good at batting their eyelids and saying, "Oh, but it's the only way I can feed my poor children," or "I'm only a young woman and I'm caught up in this heap of trade." Just playing it, and let's be honest. I mean, men are suckers for this kind of thing. We know that. But there was one woman in 1925 in Milwaukee, and she at the time was making $30,000 a year. Okay, so that's the equivalent of $500,000 a year. $500,000 today in today's money. That's how much money she was making from this. There was other women making even far more than that. There was a lady called Josephine Dory. I think you have a picture of her. And she was a dancehall girl. And she turned to a bootlegger. And she lived up in Glacier National Park. And the train line used to run beside her house. And so what happened was, when the train used to come down, it used to stop outside her house and sound the horn. And the more times it sounded the horn, that was to tell them how many cases of whiskey they needed that day. So she was making a huge amount of money. If anybody's ever seen the TV show Justified, and if you haven't seen it, it's absolutely brilliant. Timothy Olyphant, and that's superb. There's a character in it, Mags Bennett, and it's based on a woman called Maggie Bailey.
Is that the right lady there, is it? Yeah.
Queen Dory, yes. That's her up in the little cabin. So Mags Bailey was known as the Queen of Harlan County because she was selling so much moonshine. So another woman is Willie Carter Sharp. You've a picture of her. She's a rather gruff-looking lady. It's estimated that she moved 225,000 gallons of whiskey. Now, if you consider I was talking about LNG in Corrigan, up in Bushmills' yearly output to 100,000, she shipped out more than double that. Now, when she died, there was a lot of people came to her funeral, and lots of them marvelled in the fact that she had diamonds in her teeth.
It's just like a James Bond fellow. We must have rehearsed this tonight. We must have rehearsed this.
I was thinking it's maybe a little bit more like one of those, rappers over in the States,
Yeah.
She had so much money. She had diamonds put in her teeth. So it's giving you an idea of just how much money that these were they were bringing. Interestingly, one of the things that they used to do was the bootleggers used to build really, really fast cars, and women used to drive these. And they used to drive them at breakneck speeds to try and get away from the police, the authorities. Women did this as well as the men. And that's the foundation of NASCAR racing. That's where NASCAR racing came from. All these souped-up cars driving as quickly as possible over rough terrain to try and get away from the authorities. And there's lots of photographs of women doing this. So
Right.
as I say, that it was kind of an equal opportunities business.
Okay, we're 20 minutes in tonight, Marty, already, believe it or not. We better say hi to some of the people who've joined us. Trevor Watson has popped in. Trevor, good evening to you. And what do you make of it tonight? If you've anything to contribute, make sure you're watching in the main feed and the main channel, ulsterwhisky.com or Irish Whiskies Reviews Facebook page. You can comment, like, and share there. We can see your messages on screen like Trevor's. We've had the message in from a lady who we know is a bit of a whiskey aficionado. Julie Mason has been in tonight. Evening, Marty and Justin. Really looking forward to the show tonight.
Yep.
Now, if you'd like to join us, that's all you have to do. And don't forget, if you go on the Facebook page, you can actually also find there a link down below, and you can actually join our mailing list. Sean O'Neill's getting in the act tonight already, Marty. Woman in Whiskey. We're going to find out as we move into the 20th century, we're going to find out a lot more about women who played a significant role in the world of whiskey in more recent decades.
Yes. Well, just to go back to the prohibition and women moving whiskey. My favourite one is Gertrude Cleo Lithgow. She was this extremely elegant, extremely beautiful, sort of flapper-looking lady who she was known as the Queen of the Bahamas. And she used to bring in whiskey and rum. That's her. She used to smuggle in whiskey and rum by the boatload. She had so much money and so much power that she was bringing it in vast quantities. And it's not really known just how much that she actually was bringing in. She was extremely clever at manipulating men, and probably not that hard to see why. But she was doing this, and then when she was eventually sort of caught, she basically ratted on all the people that she was dealing with and said that I'm just a simple lady caught up in the whole thing, and she got away with it. So it's an absolute fortune of money. She kind of reminds me of Louise Brooks, if you know who she is. She's kind of that silent movie star. She's a wonderful woman.
No idea who she is, Marty, at all. Louise Brooks.
She's a beautiful woman. Do you ever? She was in a film called Pandora's Box. Do you ever hear the song OMD? Pandora's Box. That's all about her.
Vaguely.
But no. So again, she was kind of the queen of the whole thing. She was kind of like a female Al Capone. She was bringing in huge quantities of proper good alcohol. So that's really the prohibition done. So now you sort of want to talk about women who owned distilleries, okay? I mentioned Ellen Jane Corrigan. Now, she inherited Bushmills from her husband. And when she inherited it, it was a going company, going concern, but she was the one who turned it into a PLC, a limited company. As I say, she upped production, she introduced electricity, she didn't do any of the distilling. She actually ran the business. And this is in the 19th century. This is really, well, it wouldn't have been common. And I think because it was the whiskey trade, it was a bit, she actually was a bit like J.K. Rowling. She used to sign everything E.J. Corrigan, because that way people didn't know she was a woman,
Yes, I'm with you. A lot of woman writers do have pen names that are men's names. Yes, yeah.
George Eliot, so probably the best example of that. But in 1880, she sold Bushmill. She sold her share for £3,000, which was a considerable amount of money at that time. But she was so well regarded that she was actually kept on the board and had voting rights on the board. So she obviously was extremely well regarded. And in that regard, that would have been unusual in and of itself. Okay. Now, some of the other distilleries. So we've done Bushmills. Okay, Bushmills. Tullamore Dew. Tullamore Dew at one point was owned by a woman, Mary Ann Daly, who There's not known an awful lot about her, but she owned it. She probably didn't run it, but uh, she the fact that she owned it and had it, she must have been running it on some level. We're not too sure about what she'd done, but I mean, it was owned by a woman. But the woman I really want to talk about with Tullamore is when Grants took over Tullamore Dew. The CEO of Grants was a girl called Stella David. And she was the person who green lighted the 35 million euro budget and expenditure for the new Tullamore distillery. Now, if you get a chance to go down there, it's a fabulous place. And I mean, how much more involvement could you want from a woman in industry? The fact that she was the CEO, the fact that she green lighted a massive project, really a bit before anybody. Before that's her. Apparently, she's a big darts fan. I read in an interview.
She's a big what fan?
Premier League darts.
All right.
She doesn't remind you of someone who's your normal darts fans normally in a Millwall top and a pint of beer.
I don't know about that. If you've seen darts matches now, they're a bit of a fun fest. Now, getting plenty of your messages in tonight. Keep them coming, guys. Remember to go on the main website and do it from there. So, Peter McCabe wants you, not me, Marty. He wants you to sing Pandora's Barks for us.
No. That would be a no, Peter. If Peter would like to do a recording and send it in, I will play it next week, possibly. Would we, Justin? Would we get away with that?
No, I think Facebook would definitely cut us off if we did that. You know, we don't want to get cut off. We don't want to get cut off. So
that's we can't play the John Lee Hooker song "Women and Whiskey." Unfortunately.
Well, we would on some platforms we can. I'm going to.
Hello.
I've just sneezed. Sorry about that.
Coronavirus. Oh, he's got coronavirus.
No, too late now. I'm too sneezed. It's probably a reaction to the antibiotics I'm on to try and curb my double root canal from exploding out the side of my mouth.
I know a guy that happened to. And now, another woman I want to talk about. This woman's quite important too, Mary Dowling. She was a whiskey producer in the 19th century in Tyrone in Kentucky. Yes, named after our Tyrone over here. Now she took over a Waterfall and Fraser distillery, and when she took it over, it had already been producing whiskey in the name of these were the people who had founded it, but she took it over along with her husband as well. Now, one of the things that she did was she moved production from Kentucky to just over the border. So this was in around the Prohibition era as well, and she moved it just across the border from El Paso into Juarez, and was able to smuggle it in across. If you've ever seen Breaking Bad, well, you know all the sort of bandits live down in El Paso, you know. So one of the interesting things about her was that two family members who didn't run the distillery, they set up a whiskey distillery and wanted to trade under their surnames, which was Waterfall and Fraser. So she went to court to say, well, we own that brand. And she won, which was one of the first times that this sort of legal recognition of a brand appeared in sort of in US law. It meant that the two guys who were trying to basically make whiskey in their own names weren't allowed to do so, which is kind of a very big thing if you think about it. You know, that sort of copyright law being enshrined in various different ways. So, I mean, in its own regard, that's really quite a significant point. Now, we're going to talk
Hold on before we go there, because you've been hit with questions tonight, thick and fast. I will tell you this first. Helen Mulholland, Bushmills First Lady of Hall of Fame. What do you know about her? Do you know anything about her? Listen, Marty. These guys are sitting on the internet googling this, and they know that you don't have an earpiece in like me. You see, I have an earpiece in. That's just so I can hear Marty. But Marty doesn't have any help. He doesn't have any help there at all. All he has is.
Listen, I've even done research for this week. I've even Googled about myself to find out some stuff. Honestly, I've actually done preparation work for this week. That's how serious I'm taking it.
Well, you have to take it seriously if like 3,500 people are hanging on your every word. But listen, before you answer that, we'll put this up on the screen. And remember, if you want to get in touch, all you need to do is do it on the main site, which is this site here. Facebook.com Irish Whisky Review Live. We can then see it. If you comment on one that's been liked or shared, we mightn't see it because of privacy settings, okay? And if you think privacy exists in the internet, think again. So Frank Heron is sitting in the awning of a camper van with all the children and grandchildren in their caravans, having a wee whiskey, watching the show. We have the wagons in a circle. I like the Conestoga wagons. Frank, aren't you just down in Fermanagh?
Anyway. It's the zoo game.
Yeah, something like that there. So listen, answer that question for Jonathan McCullough, because we're halfway through the show tonight and we've hardly mentioned any of the modern ladies yet.
And I'm going to talk about Helen Mulholland and all the other modern ladies in a little bit, because I only can keep it on the timeline, just keep it on that sort of chronological time. And I want to talk about owners of distilleries, because they're really quite important. There's a picture of a Mary Cummings, who she founded the Cardew Distillery. Or Elizabeth Cummings, sorry, I should say. It makes its own whiskey now, but it was bought over by Johnny Walker. Now, Johnny Walker is the biggest selling Scotch whiskey. So she started this, and she thought, it's a very sort of weird story. She started it illegally, and then when the authorities were coming, she used to say, "Oh, would you like to come in for a wee cup of tea?" sort of thing, blah blah blah. And there's none of the men about, and nobody thought it was her that was actually doing the distilling, but it was. And so she managed to get away with it for years. And she used to put whenever the police would have come in, or the authorities would have come in, she put a flag up that alerted everybody to get everything put away. So
is that her? Is that her? Yep.
Johnny Walker. Now, this is the green label; it's not the red label. But I mean, she was the founder of the Cardew Distillery. Let me think. Who else? Marjorie Sutherland. She inherited the Dalmore Distillery. And Dalmore, if you've seen that, it's the one with the big stag's head on it. Her father and brother tried their damnedest to bankrupt the thing. Her father just gave away whiskey. He done everything. Her brother was taking loans out against it, but she managed to save the company. Now, she did sell it. It was sold in 1867. But the fact that she was running it, running any business is hard enough. But whenever your own father and brother are trying their damnedest to bankrupt you, must be doubly hard. The fact that she was actually able to survive, and Dalmore is one of the most respected brands about today, is a remarkable thing. I'm just having to take down here. Marjorie Samuel, something was his name. If you ever seen Maker's Mark, I don't have a bottle of it. I sort of thought I would go and get a bottle, but couldn't really be bothered today, if I'm honest. Maker's Mark, it's the one that's dipped in the very sort of brilliant red wax. And it was a woman come up with that. And basically what she said was, all of these bottles all sitting on a shelf all kind of look the same. But when you have Maker's Mark dipped in that red wax, it just, boom, it just, it was like an evening dress in a room of suits. And, it was her who came up with the formula, how to do it. So whenever you see any of the whiskey bottles that are dipped in this wax, and lots of them are now, it was her who come up with that idea. But I want to go to probably the most important women in certainly the Scotch industry in the 20th century. And that was a woman called Elizabeth Bessie Williamson. Okay? And she was a secretary from Glasgow. She went over to Islay, to the Laphroaig, and there she is, to Laphroaig. Now, she was so well thought of and so well regarded that the distillery was left to her. Okay? Apparently she was an extremely kind and very, very generous and lovely boss. She used to lend her employees money. She'd have given them money if they were in hard time, if something had happened at home, etc., etc. During the Second World War, she allowed Laphroaig to be used as an arms dump, an ammunition dump. So, which obviously, if the Luftwaffe had known about, they'd have blew it to smithereens. But she had something like 400 tons of munitions stored at Laphroaig to help in the war effort. But the Navy wanted to commandeer the whole place, and she said no, they could have this bit. And she stood up to the she stood up to the government and the armed forces during the Second World War. But she still managed to do the production of the whiskey. She went across when Scotch whisky wanted to promote their product in the US. This is who they sent. They sent her. Now, for a totally male-dominated industry, which let's be honest, it was at the time. This is obviously during the 1940s. She went to represent Scotch whisky industry in the US and obviously done a wonderful job. She was very big on promoting single malts as opposed to blends. So we think people were always drinking single malts. They weren't really. For a very, very long time, it was just blended whiskey. And she was one of the people who said, no, this is really good quality stuff. This is worth paying the extra money and all of that. Now, she was so well regarded that she was invested in the Order of St. John by the Queen for her charity work. She expanded Laphroaig. She retired in 1972, and she's so well thought of that Laphroaig actually have a bottling named after her, which is a travel retail exclusive. You can only really buy it at airports, and it's £460 a bottle. So is that you coughing there or sneezing again? Was it?
No, no, it wasn't. It must have been an artifact on the internet. I didn't make any noise there at all.
No, she revolutionised the Scotch whisky industry in many ways, and she opened new markets for it in America, which is obviously the biggest market for Scotch whisky in the world, etc., etc. She's often labelled as being the first woman to own and run a Scotch whisky distillery. That's not true. She's not even the first woman to own Laphroaig. Another woman called Catherine Johnson owned it at one point, along with two women, Catherine Johnson and Mrs. William Hunter. And, so obviously we don't. I don't know her first name. These two women owned Laphroaig. Just up the road, two sisters, Margaret and Flora McDougall, owned Ardbeg. A woman called Lucy Ramsey owned Port Ellen, all on Islay. So you begin to see that women owning distilleries and running distilleries wasn't the norm, but it wasn't uncommon. It was a fairly acceptable thing. And I think it probably comes from the fact that these women were very good at what they did, but it was also seen as sort of traditionally being a kind of a woman's thing for making stuff. You know what I mean? Something akin to a domestic chore. Now we'll get up now to the likes of Helen Mulholland down in Bushmills.
Good, because Jonathan McCulloch was asking that. Time is flying tonight, Marty. We're 2/3 of the way through the show tonight. We're 40 minutes in. Can you believe it already? And it's such a history lesson. Who would have thought that an industry such as alcohol, whiskey, would have had so many ladies involved at the top end of it, more or less?
At the top end, absolutely. Now, there is a book where I obviously got a lot of this from a few books that I have. One is called Women in Whisky by a guy called Fred Nimmy. Now, in it, he talks about some of the women in today, and he talks about Helen Mulholland. Now, Helen Mulholland at Bushmills is the head blender, the master blender. Now, for me, I've said this many times on doing these. For me, the blender's really the artist of the whole thing, because they're the ones who have to take all of these various casks, and all of these could be slightly different than they were last week or last month or certainly 2 or 3 years ago, and they still have to make a consistent product. So they have all of this to try and get something the same with all the various ingredients. Now, in the book by Mimic, he makes a claim. Now, I don't know whether this is true or not, but he makes the claim that Helen Mulholland is so good at what she does that she can tell you what day of the week a barrel of whiskey was distilled on, even after the years that it's been in cask. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or not, but the fact that a guy's done the research of a book, has put it in, means that she's well enough respected that it could possibly be true. Now, that gives an idea of just how well respected she is.
What's the name of that book again?
Women in Whisky. It's quite. I copied it. Justin, I copied it.
What's the guy's name that wrote it? How did he come across all this sort of detail then?
Fred Mimic. He writes about whiskey. He writes about whiskey.
But that's a real quality gem. You know, that's like the guy in Portugal who never released how you could tell a ship was coming over the horizon before radar was invented. I mean, what day of the week the barrel's made on? Come on, Marty.
What day of the week the whiskey was made on, not the barrel. What day of whiskey the whiskey is in it.
The contents, yeah.
But it gives you an idea of just how well respected she is. Now, Jonathan is quite right. She was invested as the first woman into the Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame in the States. So, I mean, she's world class.
Here, listen. There's always experts here. Now there always is. Now we've been asked this tonight. This is where we're going to get letters, and I have a feeling. I have a feeling about this. Yeah. Trevor Watson is asking: do women's taste buds work better than a man's?
In a word, no. It's there's not really. I don't think there's any real difference. What it really is, it comes down to your prep work and your knowledge, and how you do these things. There's lots of women blenders and distillers and stuff about these days, and I'll tell you a bit more about those in a minute. It really comes down to practice. As far as I know, there's obviously someone could come in here and tell me I'm wrong, but
please don't, unless you're an olfactory surgeon, because we don't want any charlatans on this show.
I'm wrong once, but I try and not make a habit of it, you know.
I know. Listen, Julie Mason's actually saying that book is an excellent read. Yes, this is where you can get the book. Honestly, we're not getting affiliate money here. We're not getting £1 for every book sold. But there's the link to the book in the UK. It's probably a different link on Amazon. It'll say, "Are you in Italy?" And it will bring it up if there's an Italian version of the book in Italian, which there might very well be, because most books are translated these days. But I can't see that, because obviously I can only go on amazon.co.uk. I can't even go on amazon.com, because obviously a lot of the stuff I want sent from the States, you can't get here. because we were trying to get a something off National Geographic, and we couldn't even get it here.
No.
No.
I'm going to have to circumvent something to get that off the National Geographic, but I have ways and means, Justin. I have ways and means.
So we have about 15 minutes left tonight, and we're going through the more recent stuff now. Arwa, have we got to that point yet? No.
We're doing the recent stuff. We're doing all in Scotland at the minute. There's a lady called Heather Nelson, who is the first woman to found solely by herself a distillery, the Tullyvady Distillery. And that's the first one. It seems strange. I've been talking all about all these women who have been, but they've pretty much always had. They've either inherited it or founded it with partners. Because a lot of the time, women didn't necessarily control the money, so their husbands or something would have been part of that. She's now founding her own distillery from scratch, which, round of applause, good girl. Well done. I congratulate you for that. We have the reason Jim Beam's here. Jim Beam, best-selling bourbon in the world, found it on land given by a woman. Woman inherited the land, and she gave the land which the distillery was built. So without her, they wouldn't have had it to start with. JJ Corey. Okay. This is the Chapel Gate Distillery. Got a girl called Louise McGinn, who is a bonder and blender. So she started this up again. It's another one of these harking back to the past. So she's doing that. I'm going to get my tour glass out. The whiskey glass, the Irish whiskey glass that I have shown a couple of times. That was designed by a woman called Rosie Goswell, who that's her design and product. So she's there. This week, a girl called Catherine Condon has been elected. Oh, I didn't even touch on all the advertising.
No, you didn't, but you did mention Jim Beam there. You did mention it.
Obviously, Bette Davis there. I want to talk quickly about the advertising. For a period during the 1960s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was all, a man sitting with a Scotty dog and Heather in the background drinking whiskey, and possibly his wife cooking dinner in the background, or some. In the 1970s, it was all some sort of dolly bird with the blonde hair looking admirably up at a man drinking a whiskey, just utter nonsense. So I seen this Bette Davis, and I thought, women drinking a cigarette and drinking bourbon, yeah, that's my kind of,
Somebody said it was her favourite actress. Betty Ward said it was her favourite actress, actually. I didn't actually mind her in that one where she was the movie star whose shadow had gone away, and she had a sister that was a movie star. It was a rather weird one. They're finding the beach dead at the end or something like that. They're weird movie, but very good.
Brilliant. Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Yes, that's correct.
Brilliant. I'm just reminded of a quote there by one of my favourite people in history, never mind the films, Tallulah Bankhead. She said at one point, my father warned me about men and booze, but he didn't mention anything about women and cocaine. Hell of a quote. But just check the time. I don't have much time left. Getting back to some of the more names, as I say, Catherine Condon has been promoted to a distiller in Irish Distillers. She was partly responsible for the Method and Madness range. I know there's another distiller down there called Deirdre O'Carroll. She teaches in the Irish Whisky Academy. Beautiful girl, really, really lovely girl. You have Rachel Barry, who is a master blender for Brown Forman, and they own 3 distilleries in Scotland. You have Marianne Eves, who is a master distiller for the Castle and Key Distillery. You have Becky Harris, who opened the Catochin Creek Distillery in Virginia in the US. Over here you have Fiona Boyd Crawford, who, along with her husband David, really nice people. They make Short Cross gin, but they have whiskey laid down, and I know it's ready. I know it's aged long enough. It's just they haven't released it yet, but it's coming, and that'll be really good quality. so she's involved in it. One of the aspects that you might be a little bit surprised to know is the cooperage. You know, where they make the barrels. There is actually a reference to a distillery over in the US back at the turn of the last century, where women were making barrels. But this would have been heavy. This is heavy enough work. But Diageo now have said that these two ladies are being trained up at the Campus Cooperage in Alloa, Angela Cochran and Kirsty Olichik. So I hope that from this, and I know this is not authoritative, there's lots and lots more you can be taught, and I'm probably missed out women today and women, but you go to any of the distilleries, and women guides are there.
There was about 2 separate shows in this, Marty. There was so much information in this, I mean, Michael Matthews is saying every day's a school day. Great stuff. There was so much more to this than even I imagined there was going to be.
You can go on. I mean, honestly, women these days, obviously, in pretty much every industry, but in the whiskey industry, they make up a third of the people who are drinking it. They are opening distilleries. They are overseeing new companies. They are and some of them are doing all the branding. Some of them are making the barrels. They're doing blenders, distillers. They're doing all of this, and they're on. I mean, you're flashing through photos, and
there's some great branding that was seen there. Look at that one. I mean, that was inspired. That one, they did it for Game of Thrones. They did White Walkers for Game of Thrones, and they come up with Jane Walker rather than Johnny Walker. It was fabulous, that.
And that's it. So whenever I started off talking about that sort of chauvinist. Well, I could swear, but I'm not going to. Talking about what the women know about whiskey. Now, I've only had an hour, but I'd like to think that anybody can walk away now and say women know an awful lot about whiskey. Probably an awful lot more than ignorant, chauvinistic men, to be quite honest with you. And to all, especially to all the Laphroaig drinking women out there, I salute you wholeheartedly.
Okay, Marty. So we've got about 8 minutes left. What have we not covered about women and whiskey that we should have covered then?
I think with put like this, we could go on, but there is still that sort of stigma about whiskey being, a macho drink and not being a feminine drink and so on. And it's just utter nonsense. Absolutely. That I poured that from this, and I got this. This is a distillery exclusive from Tullamore, and when I went in, the girl, she was a young girl. She's only probably about 25, serving behind the counter, and she says, "If you want a bottle of this, we have to go up to a secret room up the stairs." I mentioned this before, and she went up, and I was asking her questions, and she knew, boom, boom, boom. She knew her stuff. She talked about how she liked this, that it was one of her favourites because it was quite rich in flavour. But I was talking about the Phoenix, the Tullamore Dew Phoenix, and she said that was a bit strong for her the way it was. She had to put water in it. And she knew her stuff. This is a young girl of 25, there or thereabouts. I asked her, did she enjoy working at the distillery? And she said it's fantastic, great company to work for. They're really interesting. They give bonuses. They take you in and tell you how good a job you're doing, etc. So from the guides to the blenders to the distillers to the marketeers to even right the way up to the CEOs of companies. Grunt's is a huge company, so women are involved the whole way through, and as I say, they're drinking more of it, thankfully, and So if anybody's any questions about this, feel free to ask. I may or may not have the answer, but as I say, I'd like to think now that people can go, women do know what they're talking about.
I think many of the people tonight have been somewhat flabbergasted by this. When they come out with questions like, "Does women's taste buds work better than a man's?" If somebody can actually tell what day of the week a barrel was produced on, I mean,
you do have to remember that Helen Mulholland's a bit of an exceptional character. She's she's a talent. I mean, a real talent. And that's why Bushmilk is just world-class stuff.
Do you think any of these women, you mentioned one who signed her name, so that people couldn't see her name was a feminine name. Do you think there was any attrition to this in places?
No, it was in the industry, absolutely not. It's just that sort of remnant of how would you put it? That sort of chauvinist. I can use the word prick here, can't I? That sort of chauvinist.
You can, but you know what Facebook's getting like this weather. We don't want to be shut. We don't want to be shut down for talking about alcohol and saying words that are bad.
It's that kind of sort of misogynistic, chauvinistic attitude. I mean, but it belongs in some of the old adverts. I may do one of these one day on whiskey adverts, and some of the old sexist stuff will come in, basically because it's absolutely hilarious. Just who thought this was appropriate?
Some of the adverts are absolutely fantastic. I mean, what's this one all about? What's that one all about there? That Old Crow whiskey. It's a pretty salubrious advert, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this was quite a saucy thing, but this is back. I was talking earlier on about back in the 19th century, back in the 1800s. This was sort of the dance hall girls, the girls that were working in saloons and all that. They weren't all, by the way, they weren't all prostitutes. So don't think that. But lots of them were there just as, I think the Japanese do it quite a lot now, with this sort of feel good thing. No, they were there to basically get guys to drink, and they get commissioned for selling the whiskey. And this is really harking back to that. That Old Crow that back in the saloons and all, and so on and so forth. And that's all part of the story and part of the history. And to say that a woman doesn't know about whiskey is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Because hopefully I've proven that attitude belongs, I don't know, back in the 1970s.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up here. I'm just going to give a few people I mentioned tonight that we haven't managed to squeeze in. Good evening to Stephen O'Carroll. Good evening to Stanley Sung, Colin Farrell, Francis Roy, Phil Snedden, Michael Matthews, Jacqueline Welsh, Martin McShane, Nigel Martin Falls as well. And, Frank, well, listen, Frank must be trying to curry favor with the wife and the granddaughters and the daughters. He says probably your best one yet. This talk on woman. Funny enough, you can never tell which one's going to catch the imagination. I mean, I didn't think the one about the glass was going to catch people's imagination, but it was a fascinating show, Marty. So that's what Frank's saying, and he's sitting tonight in his camper van.
Just cracked up. A good man, Frank, and hope you're keeping well.
Yeah, it's a funny one. So that's probably the best one yet. So thank you very much for that. We don't know what we're doing next week, Marty, do we?
I have an idea. We did water. People seem to like the one on water, so I'm going to do one on fire.
Is that? But sure, that's mostly cocktails. Will you like the actual?
No, Justin. No. Fire is a very key part on the whiskey making process as well. And tune in next week to find out why.
Okay, we're going to do fire next week. You heard it here first. Make sure you tell all your friends. Sean O'Neill is saying another great show. Thanks, guys. Yes, we're going to wrap it up because we like to have it under an hour, because if it's under an hour, I can put it in Instagram television. And if it's over an hour, I have to edit a bit of it down. And it's very hard to do because it just rolls off Marty's tongue for an entire 60 minutes. So there you go. We're going to do fire next week. Thank you very much for watching. And, well, we're working on more surprises as well, Marty, aren't we?
Well, we're going to do some work for these things behind the scenes, because pretty much up until last week we've done zero work on any of them. It was an hour of me spouting away. So we might actually put a bit of effort into that. People seem to it.
All right. Thanks very much. And just in time, your signal has dropped to 1. The weather is pretty rough tonight. Speak to you shortly. Good night.
Take